All right, let's get started. Welcome, class, to History 101. Go ahead and grab your notebooks, maybe an extra coffee, because today's explainer is going to be a rapid-fire crash course. We're looking at a genuinely fascinating historical puzzle. Think about it. We're going to trace how a completely ignored, seemingly useless stretch of wilderness transformed into the richest, most powerful global superpower in human history. It's a wild ride. So, let's dive right in. Here is our syllabus for today. We're starting with the ignored continent, moving through the revolution, tracing the Great Westward expansion, examining the nation's massive division and reunion, and finally looking at its grand entrance onto the global stage. Starting off with Section 1, the ignored continent. Now, here's a completely wild fact to kick things off. For over 100 years after Christopher Columbus arrived in the Caribbean, almost all of North America was just ignored by the great world powers. I mean, Columbus, as you know, was really just looking for a trade route to Asia to find spices. When he finally had to present his findings to the King of Spain, the conversation basically went a little something like this. The king is like, "Where are the spices?" And Columbus basically gives a wry little shrug and says, "Well, we haven't actually found the spices yet, but hey, they've got lots and lots of gold." And that was it. That single promise of gold completely dictated the Spanish strategy. They focused all their energy on the southern lands where the gold, the silver, and the massive populations were, and they completely ignored these supposedly useless lands up north. It's really a perfect illustration of global dynamics at the time. Spain and Portugal literally drew a line right down the middle of the map, essentially splitting the non-Christian world between them. Portugal heads east to build this massive trading empire in Asia, and Spain goes to work conquering their half in the Americas. And because Spain completely ignored the north, it left this enormous, empty void on the continent. It took nearly a century, but that void is exactly what eventually allowed England to sneak in and establish their very first struggling little colonies at Roanoke and Jamestown. Moving right along to Section 2, Revolution and the Constitution. Fast forward to the 1700s. The East Coast is now covered in British colonies, while the French have gone ahead and claimed the entire middle of the continent. It was obvious a massive clash was coming to figure out who actually owned North America. But just listen to this staggering demographic mismatch in 1754. New France had a population of maybe 60,000 people. The British colonies? Over 1 million. They both team up with local Indian tribes, and boom, the French and Indian War kicks off. So, quick question for the class. Based on those numbers, who do you think won? Yeah, obviously the British crushed the French. But here's the catch. That victory came at a massive cost, leaving Britain drowning in debt. And that debt? It triggered a crystal-clear chain reaction. Step 1, Britain fights an incredibly expensive war. Step 2, Britain decides, hey, we're going to tax the American colonies to pay for that war. Step 3, the colonists are absolutely outraged because they're getting taxed without having any voting rights back in the British government. And finally, Step 4, that outrage turns into an all-out revolution, giving us the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. But here's the thing a lot of folks tend to forget. Winning their freedom 5 years later didn't magically turn them into a superpower overnight. Honestly, their first attempt at a government was a total disaster. Those 13 colonies basically turned into 13 independent, completely failing countries that were united in name only. The whole new nation was collapsing so fast that the Founding Fathers actually had to scrap the old system entirely. They had to write the Constitution, the exact same framework they use today, just to create a federal government that actually worked, eventually electing George Washington in 1789.
Okay, Section 3, the Great Westward Expansion.
Now, I want to pose a Socratic question to you all. If the early United States was just this narrow little strip of land on the East Coast, how in the world did they get so much more territory? The answer, incredibly enough, involves a French dictator all the way across the ocean. Napoleon Bonaparte had secretly reacquired Louisiana from Spain. He was dreaming of a grand American empire. But he was also planning to invade Britain, and, well, invasions require serious cash. In this incredibly famous exchange with his advisor Talleyrand, Napoleon has this massive strategic realization. He says, if we sell Louisiana to the Americans, they will be our friends forever, and Britain will be ours. He literally decided to scrap his entire American empire simply to fund his European wars. And that brings us to the crucial point, the absolute steal of a bargain this was. The United States paid exactly $15 million for the entire Louisiana territory. Just think about that. With a single signature, America accidentally doubled its size. And they desperately needed the room, honestly, because the average American family at the time was having around 7 children. The population was literally doubling every 20 years.
From there, the dominoes just started falling, and fast. In 1819, America buys Florida from Spain. Down south, Mexico wins its independence, and soon American settlers formed the Republic of Texas. By 1845, the U.S. officially annexes Texas, which pretty predictably triggers a war with Mexico. Fast forward to 1848, the U.S. pays Mexico for the rest of its northern territories and strikes a border deal with Britain for Oregon. I mean, in just 50 years of wild opportunism, sheer luck, and war, America suddenly stretches all the way from sea to sea.
So, what do you do when you literally run out of continent? Well, you look to the ocean. In a truly bizarre twist of historical humor, America passes the Guano Island Act. This law literally allowed U.S. citizens to claim any unclaimed, uninhabited island on the planet for the United States, provided it was covered in bird droppings. Seriously, guano was highly valuable for fertilizer back then, and believe it or not, this law is actually still on the books today.
Which brings us to Section 4, Division and Reunion.
So while the country was physically expanding on the map, a massive, catastrophic internal crisis was boiling over back home. The nation was fundamentally, deeply fractured over the issue of slavery. Up in the northern states, slavery was illegal, and more people were viewing it as a profound moral evil that simply had to be stopped. Down in the southern states, however, slavery was this deeply entrenched institution that served as the entire foundation of their economy. They'd been bitterly arguing over this for decades, but the powder keg finally blew when Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860, which completely terrified the South, who believed he was going to abolish the institution altogether. Deeply fearing Lincoln's policies, most of those slave states actually seceded to try and form their own country. And that right there was the direct cause of the American Civil War. The result? An unimaginably brutal, bloody conflict with a massive death toll, ultimately ending in a decisive victory for the North. And the profound aftermath of this immense tragedy was twofold. The slaves were finally freed, and the fractured United States was forcefully reunited once again. Yet it's crazy. Even right in the middle of this solemn national recovery, another totally bizarre real estate deal just falls into America's lap. The Russian Tsar is looking to unload Alaska. So the Russian minister, a guy named Stuckel, meets up with U.S. Secretary of State Seward. They do a little quick haggling, and Stuckel says, "I have approval for $7 million. We can make the treaty tomorrow." And Seward, clearly eager to lock this down before anyone changes their mind, replies, "Can we do it tonight?" Yep, another totally unbelievable bargain. $7 million for the absolute massive resource-rich territory of Alaska. They literally rushed the paperwork through in the middle of the night. And just like that, America secured yet another enormous, opportunistic chunk of land for their growing nation. All right, final unit for today, Section 5, Entering the Global Stage. So America had conquered the continent, reunited its states, and snagged Alaska. Now American businessmen were looking outward into the Pacific, specifically eyeing the Hawaiian Islands. These businessmen essentially take control of Hawaii and start begging the U.S. to formally annex them. Now, the initial presidential response was actually no, arguing that America shouldn't misuse its power to just swallow up weaker nations. But others pointed out a pretty terrifying alternative. If the U.S. didn't take Hawaii, another rising military power, like maybe Germany or Japan, definitely would, and they could use it as a base to attack America. It really highlights the ultimate historical question for any rising power. Should a nation mind its own business or mind its own interests? Well, that old policy of staying out of global conflicts totally vanished in 1898. Cuba is fighting this brutal war for independence against Spain. Suddenly, an American warship sinks in a mysterious explosion right near Cuba. The U.S. immediately demands that Spain leave. Spain's response? They declare war. But in an absolute flash, the U.S. captures Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Just like that, in one swift stroke, America effectively puts an end to the very same Spanish empire that Columbus had started 400 years earlier. America officially had its own overseas colonies. Oh, and they also went ahead and annexed Hawaii during the chaos, just for good measure. Soon after all this, the young, incredibly energetic Theodore Roosevelt becomes president. And he brings a highly muscular approach to diplomacy. He desperately wants to build a canal through Central America. He offers Colombia $10 million for the rights. Colombia agrees at first, but then backs out. Roosevelt's response to this? Absolutely ruthless. He immediately recognizes a newly independent Panama, essentially telling them, "Hey, Panama, welcome to the club of countries. We want to build a canal right here." And Panama naturally said, yes.
By 1914, the Panama Canal officially opens for business. And this was the final strategic piece of the puzzle. It meant Roosevelt's massive new U.S. Navy could rapidly shift fleets between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, securing absolute naval dominance. This wasn't just about shipping cargo. This was the exact moment America was perfectly positioned as a true, undeniable world power. Right at the exact same moment World War I erupted and the old European powers began to completely tear each other apart.
So class, as we wrap up today's explainer, I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to debate in your study groups. Looking back at 4 centuries of empty continents, accidental real estate bargains, completely rushed late-night treaties, and perfectly timed global wars, was America's rise from an ignored wilderness to the most powerful nation in history, driven by strategic brilliance? Or was it just pure, unbelievable historical luck? Something to think about. Class dismissed.